The Battle of Stalingrad started on August 23, 1942, and ended on February 2nd, 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad was fought between the Russians, the Germans, and some of the Germans' minor allies like the Hungarians and the Bulgarians. Before the Battle of Stalingrad began, the Soviets pressed out massive anti-German propaganda, and the citizens helped to build barricades and defenses and fortify the city. The Battle of Stalingrad was initiated by the Germans who assaulted the city. The Battle of Stalingrad had fierce close combat fighting as it was in a very urban city. The German Luftwaffe, or their air force, was constantly bombing Stalingrad and the Russian forces. So the Russians started to get closer to the Germans so that the Luftwaffe would also bomb the Germans if they bombed the Russians. The Germans had a lot of really good tanks, but the Russians had a lot more tanks. Snipers were deployed on both sides and were a constant threat. The Germans attacked and pushed far into Stalingrad. The Germans had pushed up all the way to a thin strip of land along the river Volga. The Germans attacked military factories in Stalingrad, which were still pumping out equipment until the German troops literally burst into the doors. Stalingrad was right next to the river Volga, and the Russians reinforced their troops inside of Stalingrad from the east bank of the river Volga. The Soviets, being ferried across the river Volga from the east bank to the west, were constantly under the attack of German artillery and the Luftwaffe. Stalin commanded Order number 227, which was literally no step back. The Soviets were preparing a counteroffensive. The Russians responded by attacking the Bulgarians and Hungarians at the Germans' flanks, which were very weak compared to the Germans. The weaker flanks crumbled against the Soviet attacks, and the Soviets managed to encircle the Germans.
Front line ran from down here through Stalingrad in front of Paulus and right the way back to his rear. It was here in the north that the Soviets had mustered a massive force which had broken through behind Paulus. There was even worse news to come. Just 24 hours later, more Soviet tanks broke through the front line in the south and headed north to link up with the others. Soviet forces were closing like huge jaws around Paulus and his entire 6th Army. On the 24th of November, the jaws closed near the town of Kalach.
Hitler attempted to rescue the encircled German army by way of a panzer tank division and the Luftwaffe, reinforcing them from the air. Even with the lack of Soviet resistance in the air, the German Luftwaffe began losing planes and withdrawing them to other fronts. Heinrich von Manstein was in charge of the Panzer Tank Army, which was trying to rescue the encircled German army. However, the Russian winter struck again. Tanks on both sides during the winter ran into trouble, however, with guns not working properly and tanks just grinding to a stop. The Soviets, however, having a greater number of tanks, still had tanks to fight with, as even though some of their tanks were malfunctioning, they still had a lot more. The Germans also lacked winter uniforms, which the Soviet Russians had, so the Germans were freezing cold in the dead of winter, while being encircled, with no supplies. The encircled German army eventually surrendered, and the Russians won the Battle of Stalingrad.